This is part 2 of our series where we explore the most overlooked settings for VR in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, check that out. We went deep into the Quest 3 headset settings, and everything that follows from here out builds on that foundation. In this one, we're diving into the NVIDIA Control Panel. And by the end, you'll know how to optimize your NVIDIA settings so that it will be well synced with what we have done in the Quest 3 headset already. Now, if you don't have a Quest 3, don't worry. A lot of what we're going to discuss here still applies. So, I have my laptop here. Now, let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see the screen better. There we go. And let's dive right in. And first up is image scaling. So this is a driver level upscaler from NVIDIA that's supposed to boost performance by rendering games at a low resolution and sharpening the result. But for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, it really is unnecessary because the sim already has a much better option like DLSS or even TAA that's built into the sim. So turning this on would just stack more sharpening on top of what's already there, which can actually make things look worse, especially around menus and cockpit glass and so forth. So this we're definitely going to leave off. And next up we have ambient occlusion. So this one adds subtle shadows where surfaces meet, like corners or panel edges, to give these scenes a bit more depth. But really and truly, the sim already handles this internally with its own ambient occlusion, and honestly, the sim does a better job. And you know, if we force this on here through the NVIDIA driver, we're risking conflicts and weird shading glitches and extra GPU load for no real benefit. So we keep this off and let the sim handle it the way it was meant to. Next up, anisotropic filtering. This keeps textures like runways and roads sharp when we're viewing at an angle. Otherwise, it may look like blurry, smeared, smudged textures. So we're going to set this to 16x, which is the highest quality. It's going to give us the maximum texture clarity with really no noticeable hit to performance. Now, in this case, the sim also has its own anisotropic filtering setting. That one takes priority, but setting 16x globally here at the driver level kind of acts like a fallback if the sim or any app tries to lower it. Right? So we're going to leave this on 16x with no downside. Moving right along, we have FXAA, which is basically just an old anti-aliasing method and really is completely unnecessary for this sim because we have DLSS, we have TAA, and those are going to be far superior. So there's no need to turn this on, just leave this one off. Next up, anti-aliasing gamma correction, and I don't know why I have it on. Usually I would keep this off. I mean, this is a older form of anti-aliasing that is applied in bright areas. But as mentioned before, in this sim, we have DLSS and TAA. So that's going to be more superior than this older method. So we leave it off. I mean, it does nothing here and could even add a bit of unwanted processing in those bright areas. So I would say leave this off. If for whatever reason you find the sim doesn't look good when all the other settings are applied, maybe come back and put it on and see, but I would definitely leave this off. Again, I am sorry. I don't know why it's on in this setting here, but I want to turn it off. Then we're looking at anti-aliasing mode. This setting just tells the GPU who's in charge of anti-aliasing. We leave it on application control so that the sim can handle it using DLSS or TAA. We definitely don't want to force anything here, so we're just going to leave it on application controlled. Then the next one, anti-aliasing setting, that's grayed out because we have the mode set to application controlled. Then we move on to anti-aliasing transparency. This setting adds anti-aliasing to transparent textures like fences, grass, or mesh, but it only works with older anti-aliasing technology, which this sim doesn't use. We're running DLSS or maybe TAA, so this really does nothing. We leave it off. No need to waste GPU cycles. Moving right along, background application max frame rate. This just limits the frame rate for background applications that aren't in focus. Since we don't really multitask during VR and 60 FPS is a safe ceiling, we just leave it right there at 60 FPS. Then we have CUDA GPUs. Obviously, we're going to set that to all. That's just our CUDA cores in our GPU. We want to utilize the full GPU, so we keep that on all. Next up, CUDA system fallback. This simply controls what happens if the CUDAs fail, like whether the system should fall back to a slower CPU processing. I've left it on driver default, which just lets NVIDIA decide on a case-by-case basis what is the best scenario for that situation. So unless you are trying to troubleshoot something specific, I just leave it on driver default. Next up, DSR factors. So DSR lets you render games at a higher resolution than what your screen would allow, and then downscale it for sharper image quality. But this does literally nothing for VR, and we're not going to use it for this sim, so we leave that off just to keep things clean and efficient. Then the next one, DSR smoothness, that's off and it's grayed out because we have the factors off, so smoothness is going to be off by default. Next up, we have low latency mode. And low latency mode tells the GPU to send out frames faster. So even though we are going to be frame locked at 45 frames, this can cause those frames to come more rapidly. And this can reduce input lag in some games, but in Microsoft Flight Simulator, especially in VR, that can actually cause problems. And we're using motion smoothing, right, which is the synchronous space warp, which we mentioned in part 1 of the series, which relies on steady frame pacing to work properly. So forcing low latency can actually break that rhythm and cause stutters or artifacts. So this should be kept off. And yes, I have it on here, but I was actually testing something and running some benchmarks, but this will be or has already been switched back to off. Then we move on to max frame rate. This sets the maximum frame rate that the system is allowed to render. We've set it to 45 frames per second, and this works in sync with our headset's 90 Hz refresh rate. And we would have gone through this in part 1. But what this does is it gives us one real frame from the sim and one interpolated frame from synchronous space warp, also mentioned in part 1 of the series, and they are perfectly timed between each other. This keeps the motion smooth and consistent in VR. Moving right along, we go to monitor technology. I have mine set to G-Sync compatible, but really and truly this setting is for flat screen monitors. And in VR, it doesn't do anything at all. The headset has its own refresh system, so this setting has no effect on performance. It really doesn't matter. Now we're going on to multi-frame sampled AA or anti-aliasing. This is an older anti-aliasing option that only works with MSAA, which this sim does not use. In VR, it can actually cause problems like blending across frames, which conflicts with motion smoothing, like synchronous space warp. So we keep this one off. It's definitely not needed. So next up, OpenGL GDI compatibility. This setting only applies to older OpenGL programs with legacy UI overlays. Microsoft Flight Simulator and VR doesn't use that, so we just leave it on auto. It won't affect anything. Then we're going to the rendering GPU. So this tells the OpenGL which GPU to use. You want to set it manually to whatever GPU you have in your system so that there's no confusion. After that, power management mode, very self-explanatory. You just want to make sure and put that on prefer maximum performance so that you don't undervolt or anything like that. Then preferred refresh rate, it's even highlighted well in brackets there showing my monitor. Highest available. This is not going to affect VR at all. This is to do with your flat screen monitor. Next up, shader cache size. So this controls how much space is going to be used to store pre-compiled shaders. This in theory should help reduce stutters, and it will also help speed up loading times. Now I've set mine to 100 gigabytes, but that may be a bit of an overkill, to be honest. You can lower it down quite a bit from there. Just make sure it's on, don't disable it. I also clear it occasionally to get rid of old or broken files, and you definitely want to clear it after any big updates. Moving along to Anisotropic sample optimization. This reduces texture detail slightly to save performance during the anisotropic filtering. But we want full texture sharpness, especially on surfaces like runways and roads, so just leave this off. Moving along, negative LOD bias. This controls whether the sim can force extra sharpening on textures or not. We set it to clamp. This is going to avoid shimmering, especially on distant terrain like runways. In any case, with the use of DLSS or even TAA, we are already handling sharpness, and clamp just keeps things clean and stable. Next up, we have texture filtering quality. This controls the overall precision of texture filtering. We're just going to set it to high quality. It's going to keep our textures crisp, and there's no real performance hit, so it's an easy win and an easy decision to make. Then we move to trilinear optimization. This is a texture filtering shortcut that's meant to save a bit of performance, but turning it off actually gives us better texture transitions and clarity, especially across like terrain and runways and stuff like that. So we're going to leave this off for cleaner visuals, and we're going to move to threaded optimization. This controls whether the driver uses multiple CPU threads for graphical tasks. We're going to leave it on auto, so the driver only steps in when it makes sense to do so, and that's going to reduce our risk of conflicts or stutters. Next up, triple buffering. Triple buffering only matters if you're using VSync, which we are not. Since this does not apply to VR, we leave it off. Next up, vertical sync. And in the past, I've actually had this set to adaptive half refresh rate, but I think I was wrong, and I've since corrected that, and now I leave this off because VSync is really for flat screens, not VR. And the adaptive half tries to match your monitor's refresh rate, not your headset. So since our VR frame timing is already locked and handled separately, we're just going to leave VSync off to avoid any conflicts. And we continue on to virtual reality pre-rendered frames. We're going to set that to 1. This controls how many frames the CPU is allowed to queue up before sending them to the GPU in VR. Setting it to 1 means the system delivers each frame as close to real time as possible, which reduces motion to photon delay. That gives us the fastest possible response when you move your head or look around. It's going to keep everything sharp and properly synced in VR. So definitely set that to 1. Next up, variable rate super sampling. So what this does is it allows the driver to lower detail in your peripheral vision to save performance in VR. But in Microsoft Flight Simulator, this could cause blurring and conflict with DLSS and reduce visual consistency. So we leave that off, and this is something that we can actually do more effectively in the OpenXR toolkit, which is coming up in the next part of this series. So last on your list is Vulkan OpenGL preset method. This only applies to Vulkan or OpenGL games, not Microsoft Flight Simulator or VR. We're still going to leave it on auto so that the driver can handle if it ever is needed, but we won't need it for Microsoft Flight Simulator. And that wraps it up for the NVIDIA Control Panel settings. These changes help keep our visuals sharp, your frame pacing smooth, and avoid driver level conflicts with VR tools like DLSS and SSW. Nothing fancy, just clean, stable foundation so everything else works the way it should. In part 3, we move into the OpenXR toolkit and continue building from there. Thanks for watching, and that link to part 3 is right there.